Let's talk landscaping. The first thing we're going to take into consideration is our individual elements. So first we have color. The second we have height. And the third is texture. But this is also something you can carry over into your custom trees or even existing trees. So these are all the same color variants, but they do have their own individual textures. Now it is combining these three elements which allow us both to look at landscape on a micro scale and a macro scale. So first we're going to take a look at this as a micro scale. So this is a small garden area, and you can see here that we have used what I would call analogous colors. So colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. You can check out the palette video earlier on a little bit more information here, but we've also matched our textures both with the grasses and the flowers, and we have some varying heights going around, so it kind of pushes the higher elements into the back with the shorter in the front, and that gives us this very well pieced together garden area. So these are the individual elements, but there are some design elements that we also want to consider. So let's take a second to look at those design elements. So this first one is called symmetrical versus asymmetrical. So your symmetrical is just mirroring one side, and the asymmetrical is intentionally not mirroring the other side, whatever you're doing. The second is lined versus curved. So one of them is very concerned with like straight edges and blunt ends, while the other is just more of a following the flow of your terrain or creating your own customization. Then you have sparse versus filled, so more of an empty area, and then another one that fills not just with plants, but also even like hardscape elements or pottery, that sort of thing. And then finally, you have purpose. So is my purpose to hang out by myself? Is my purpose to be social? So these are all elemental designs that you can use to inform your landscape. And you'll actually notice in the little micro landscape that we had created over here that we used focused on asymmetrical, and we focused with sparse on one side and filled on the other. But what about when you want to go macro? Well, we have two options for that. The first one is customizing a terrain, and the second is a custom terrain. These are two separate elements. So the first is customizing a terrain. Now, the thing about customizing a terrain is you take the natural biome and you simply add some custom elements to it. So adding some rock face, adding some minor changes to your terrain. And you can do this to varying different degrees. So it could be just a couple of changes, or it could be a lot of changes. So here you can see that we have added custom trees, which we didn't really have in the previous one, or rather the custom trees matched the natural trees that were already here. We've gone a little bit more wild with these ones. We've also gotten a little more wild with the pathway, adding a greater variety of difference in the blocks. We've added some custom natural features with the waterfall and the muddied areas. And we've even taken some trees that are native to Minecraft from a separate biome and brought them into this biome. So there's a lot more customization here. But then you have a custom terrain. And here's what I would say is the greatest element of a custom terrain, and that is that the majority of the blocks are not native to the biome that you are working in. So in this case, we have moss being the most used block in our terrain, and then we've supplemented that with some different elements, with the different netherracks, with some tough cliffs, and we also have our custom elements, as we saw before, our custom trees, as well as even some farming designs. Now you will notice in this custom terrain that we have paid attention to, once again, our colors, our textures, and our heights. Now, there is an additional element for a custom terrain that you have to pay attention to that you don't have to pay attention to in a customizing terrain, and that is your transitionary periods, which you can see here that I've actually used texture to transition from this custom terrain into what will be another custom terrain, and that's what I would call a soft transition. Now, a hard transition would be like using like a wall or the ocean or a cliffside to kind of cut off your custom terrain in what feels like a more natural way. And the third way is to use purpose as your transitionary period. So like a volcano exploding, it makes sense that the ground would be turning ashen versus what is very green at the very next block. So these are all things to take in consideration. And once again, in this small sample biome here, you can see that I've worked on using analogous colors, that I have pulled colors and pulled heights in order to tie this all together and make it feel like a more natural, soft transition. And it's actually really what I think is pretty cool to be able to create both customized terrains and custom terrain. So taking into consideration once more your color, your height, your texture, both in your plants, in your trees, in your shrubs, and then tying those all together in both a macro and micro level. using your design elements like symmetrical versus asymmetrical, your straight lines versus your curves, a more emptying out of space versus filling a space. And then finally, both for your transitions and your landscape, considering what is your purpose, because the purpose itself can add its own smoothness, its own cohesiveness, just because the human mind says, yes, these things are supposed to go together. So I hope that these will help you in creating your own customized terrains, custom terrain, or even just little gardens up and around your build. What a pleasure. Have a great day.